Black biker woke up to find boss's daughter wearing his cut. What she said left him frozen. The leather was too big for her. That was the first thing Mason Wilder noticed when he opened his eyes at 4:47 in the morning. The way his cut hung past her hips, the sleeves swallowing her arms, the patches that had taken him 11 years to earn now draped across shoulders that had never known the weight of the road. She was standing at the window of his apartment, backlit by the amber glow of a street lamp, and she was crying. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that came from somewhere so deep it didn't make sound anymore. And when she turned and saw him watching, when her eyes met his across the darkness of that room, she said 4 words that stopped his heart cold. "My father killed yours." Wait, before the next ride begins. If this story already hit you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up, back to the road. Mason didn't move, couldn't move. The words hung in the air like smoke from a barrel, thick and acrid and impossible to breathe through. He lay there in the tangle of sheets, his chest bare, his heart hammering against his ribs, and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Lily Brennan, 24 years old, daughter of Seamus Brennan, president of the Iron Saints MC for the last 19 years. The same Seamus Brennan who had pulled Mason off the streets when he was 17, who had given him a prospect patch and a purpose, who had stood beside him at his mother's funeral and promised that the club would always be his family. The same Seamus Brennan who, according to the woman now wearing Mason's cut, had murdered his father. "What did you say?" Mason's voice came out rough, scraped raw by sleep and shock. He sat up slowly, the sheets falling away, and felt the cold night air hit his skin like a slap. Lily turned fully to face him. The tears on her cheeks caught the streetlight, turning them silver. She looked small inside his leather, fragile in a way he had never seen her before. Lily Brennan was not a fragile woman. She was fire and steel, sharp edges and sharper words. The kind of woman who walked into a room full of bikers and made them feel like they were the ones who should be nervous. But not tonight. Tonight, she looked like something broken. "I found letters," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "In my father's safe. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was looking for the deed to the cabin for the reunion next month. But I found everything." Mason swung his legs over the side of the bed. His feet hit the cold hardwood floor, and the shock of it grounded him, pulled him back from the edge of whatever abyss he was teetering over. "Everything," he repeated. "What does that mean?" Lily reached into the pocket of his cut on her body, and the wrongness of that image still hadn't fully registered, and pulled out a folded envelope. She crossed the room, her bare feet silent on the floor, and held it out to him. "Read it, then decide if you still want me here." Mason took the envelope. It was old, yellowed at the edges, the paper soft with age. No address, no stamp, just a name written in faded ink on the front. Marcus. His father's name. Mason's hands were steady as he opened the envelope. He had learned, over the years, to keep his hands steady no matter what. It was one of the first things the club had taught him, that a man who couldn't control his body couldn't control his life. So his hands were steady, even as his heart cracked open like an egg. The letter inside was short, written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. "Marcus, I know what you're planning. I know about the money, the deal with the Diablos, everything. You think you can walk away from the Saints and take half our treasury with you? You think Seamus won't find out?" "He already knows, brother. He's known for weeks, and he's not going to let you leave alive. I'm writing this because I owe you, for what you did for me in Tulsa, for the time you saved my life when I didn't deserve saving. Consider this my repayment. Get out, tonight, take your family and run, and don't ever look back. But if you stay, if you think you can talk your way out of this, or fight your way out, or whatever other stupid plan you've got cooking in that head of yours, you're going to die, and Seamus is going to make sure it looks like an accident. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. D. Mason read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words cut deeper, carving grooves into his understanding of the world that would never smooth over. His father had died when Mason was 6 years old. A motorcycle accident, everyone said. Lost control on a wet road outside of Barstow, hit a guardrail, went over the edge. They'd found the bike at the bottom of a ravine, and Marcus Wilder's body 100 feet further down, broken on the rocks. No foul play, the cops had said. No evidence of anything except bad luck and bad weather. But the letter in Mason's hands told a different story. A story of betrayal, of stolen money, of a president who had killed his own brother to protect the club's secrets. "Where did you find this?" Mason asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat, distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside his body. "In the safe, with others." Lily's voice was trembling now. "There's more, Mason, so much, Mason. Letters, ledgers, records of payments to the coroner who signed the death certificate, the cops who closed the case, the reporter who wrote the story about the accident." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "My father didn't just kill your father. He erased him, made it so clean that no one ever questioned it." Mason set the letter down on the bed beside him. He stared at it for a long moment, watching the yellowed paper catch the dim light, watching the words blur as his vision unfocused. 23 years. He had been part of the Iron Saints for 23 years. First as a kid hanging around the clubhouse while his mother worked as a bartender, then as a prospect at 17, then as a full patch at 21. He had bled for this club, killed for it when the situation demanded. He had given Seamus Brennan his loyalty, his trust, his whole goddamn life. And all that time, the man he called his president had been the one who murdered his father. "Why are you telling me this?" Mason looked up at Lily. "Why now? Why tonight?" Lily's jaw tightened. She looked away, toward the window, toward the street below, where the world was still asleep and ignorant of the earthquake happening in this small apartment. "Because I couldn't live with it anymore," she said. "Because I've known for 3 days, and every time I look at my father, I want to scream. Because you deserve the truth, Mason. You've always deserved the truth." "And the cut?" He gestured at the leather hanging from her shoulders. "Why are you wearing my cut?" Lily looked down at herself as if she had forgotten. When she looked back up, her eyes were fierce, wet but fierce. "Because I wanted to know what it felt like, to wear something that meant loyalty, something that meant honor." Her voice cracked. "My father taught me those words. He made me believe they meant something. And now I find out that everything he built, everything he stands for, is rooted in murder and lies." She reached up and began to shrug the cut off her shoulders. Mason stopped her. "Keep it on." Lily froze. "What?" Mason stood. He was a tall man, 6'3", broad-shouldered, built like someone who had spent his youth lifting engines and his adulthood lifting the weight of responsibility. His skin was dark against the pale sheets, against the pale walls, against the pale woman standing in front of him wearing his identity like a costume. "Keep it on," he repeated. "It looks better on you than it ever did on me." "Mason!" "You know what that patch means?" He pointed to the center of her chest, where the Iron Saints logo sat, a burning halo over a clenched fist. "It means I belong to them, to the club, to your father. It means I swore an oath, gave blood, promised to put the brotherhood above everything else." He paused, and something in his voice shifted, hardened. "But tonight, I found out that oath was built on a lie. So maybe it doesn't mean anything anymore. Maybe it never did." Lily watched him with wide eyes. She had known Mason Wilder for most of her life, had grown up seeing him at cookouts and funerals and club events, watching him rise through the ranks with a quiet determination that everyone respected. She had never seen him like this, never seen the mask slip to reveal whatever was underneath. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Mason walked to the window. He looked down at the street below, empty, silent, waiting for the sun. His motorcycle was parked at the curb, chrome gleaming under the streetlight. A machine he had built with his own hands from parts he'd scavenged and saved for. "I don't know," he said honestly. 23 years. That's how long I've been loyal to a man who killed my father. 23 years of yes sir and no sir and whatever you need, Seamus, I'm here." He pressed his palm against the cold glass. "How do you walk away from that? How do you even start?" "You don't have to walk away." Lily stepped up beside him. In the window's reflection, he could see her face, pale, determined, afraid. "We can expose him, together." "I have the documents, the letters, everything. We can take it to the police, to the ATF, to whoever will listen." "And then what?" Mason turned to face her. "Your father goes to prison? The club falls apart? Every brother who ever trusted me finds out I'm the one who brought it all down?" He shook his head. "That's not justice, Lily. That's just a different kind of destruction." "Then what is justice? Letting him get away with it? Pretending you never found out?" Mason didn't answer. He couldn't answer, because he didn't know. His whole life had been built on a foundation he just discovered was rotted through. And now he was standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out which direction led to solid ground. "There's something else," Lily said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you yet." Mason felt his stomach drop. "What?" Lily reached into the other pocket of his cut and pulled out a second envelope. This one was newer, white, crisp, sealed with wax that bore the Iron Saint's insignia. "I found this in the safe too. It's addressed to you. My father wrote it, but he never sent it." She handed it to Mason. "I don't know what's in it. I couldn't bring myself to open it." Mason stared at the envelope. His name was written on the front in Seamus Brennan's distinctive hand, bold, slanted, the handwriting of a man who had never learned to doubt himself. He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in that same bold handwriting. "Mason, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, or you found your way into my safe. Either way, I suppose it's time you knew the truth. I killed your father. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. Marcus was my brother in every way that mattered, and I put him in the ground because he gave me no other choice. What you don't know, what no one knows, is why. Your father wasn't just planning to steal money from the club. He was planning to sell us out. He'd made a deal with the Diablos to hand over our routes, our suppliers, our people. In exchange, they were going to set him up with a new identity and a new life somewhere far from here. I found out 3 days before he was supposed to make the exchange. I confronted him, begged him to walk it back, to find another way. But Marcus was always stubborn. He said the club had become something he didn't recognize anymore, something he couldn't be part of. He said he was getting out, and nothing I said was going to stop him. So I stopped him the only way I could. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and even if I did, that's not the kind of thing a man can ask for. But I am asking you to understand. The club, your club now, more than it ever was mine, would not exist if I had let Marcus walk away. everything we've built, everything we've protected, everyone who wears this patch, it all would have burned. I made a choice. I chose the many over the one, and I've lived with that choice every day for 23 years. You're the best man I've ever known, Mason. Better than me, better than your father. You've earned every patch on that cut, and you've earned the truth. I just hope, when you learn it, you'll understand why I couldn't tell you sooner. Whatever you decide to do with this information, I won't fight you. If you want to expose me, expose me. If you want to put a bullet in my head, I'll kneel and let you do it. But know this, everything I did for the club, for the brothers, for you. I'm sorry, son, for everything. Seamus. Mason read the letter twice, 3 times. The words blurred and sharpened, like the road on a long ride when fatigue started to set in. His father had been a traitor. That was what Seamus was saying. Marcus Wilder, the man Mason had spent his whole life mourning, the ghost he had chased through every mile of highway and every hour of service to the club, that man had been willing to sell out his brothers for a new start. And Seamus Brennan, the president, the mentor, the closest thing Mason had to a father figure, he had killed Marcus to stop it. Mason? Lily's voice came from somewhere far away. Mason, what does it say? He handed her the letter without a word. He watched her read it, watched her face shift through disbelief and anger and something that might have been understanding. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that held questions she didn't know how to ask. "Do you believe him?" she whispered. Mason walked back to the bed. He sat down heavily, feeling the weight of 23 years pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The sun rose 3 hours later, painting Mason's apartment in shades of gold and amber. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing his cut, her face relaxed in the way it never was when she was awake. Mason had not slept. He had spent the hours staring at the 2 letters, reading them over and over, trying to reconcile the father he remembered with the traitor Seamus described. His memories of Marcus Wilder were fragmentary, the impressions of a 6-year-old, soft around the edges, more feeling than fact. He remembered laughter. He remembered strong hands lifting him onto a motorcycle. He remembered the smell of leather and gasoline, and a voice that promised to take him riding someday when he was big enough. But he also remembered arguments, raised voices in the kitchen late at night, his mother crying, his father storming out and not coming back until morning. He remembered the tension that lived in their house like a third parent, silent, heavy, always present. Had his father been planning to leave even then? Had those arguments been about the club, about the deal with the Diablos, about a betrayal that was already in motion? Mason didn't know, and that was the cruelest part. He would never know. The truth had died with Marcus Wilder at the bottom of a ravine, and all Mason had left were 2 letters that told 2 different stories. His phone buzzed, a text from Bishop, his sergeant-at-arms. "Church at noon. Press wants everyone there." Mason stared at the message. In 4 hours, he would have to walk into the clubhouse and face Seamus Brennan. He would have to look into the eyes of the man who had killed his father and pretend that nothing had changed. Or he would have to confront him, expose him, tear down everything the Iron Saints had built on a foundation of blood and silence. He didn't know which option was worse. A soft sound made him look up. Lily was awake, sitting on the couch, watching him with those fierce, wounded eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked. It was the same question she had asked hours ago, but this time Mason had an answer. "I'm going to church," he said. "I'm going to look your father in the face, and I'm going to figure out what kind of man I want to be." Lily stood. She crossed the room, still wearing his cut, and stopped in front of him. She reached up and touched his face, a gesture so tender, so unexpected that it nearly broke him. "Whatever you decide," she said, "I'm with you. I know that doesn't mean much, coming from his daughter, but I need you to know I didn't come here tonight just to give you information. I came because—" She hesitated, searching for words. "Because you're the only good thing to come out of that club, the only one who ever treated me like a person instead of a princess. And if burning it all down is what it takes to make this right, then I'll hand you the match." Mason looked at her, really looked. Past the tears and the exhaustion and the weight of her father's sins, he saw someone who had given up everything, her family, her safety, her whole identity, to tell him the truth. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for me?" Lily's answer was simple. Because someone had to. And because— She took a breath. "Because I've been in love with you since I was 16 years old, and I couldn't watch you live a lie for one more day." The words landed somewhere deep in Mason's chest. He had known, on some level, that there was something between them. Looks that lingered too long, conversations that went too deep, a connection that neither of them had ever named. But hearing it spoken aloud, in this moment, in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, he pulled her close, held her against his chest, feeling the leather of his own cut press between them, feeling her heartbeat match his own. "I don't know how this ends," he said into her hair. "I don't know if I can forgive your father, or if I even want to. But I know I can't do this alone. You won't have to." They stood like that until the sun was fully up, until the world outside began to wake, until it was time to face whatever waited for them at the Iron Saints clubhouse. The clubhouse sat on 2 acres of land at the edge of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and guarded by men who had sworn to die for each other. Mason had ridden through those gates 1,000 times. Today, it felt like riding into a foreign country. Lily had stayed behind. They had agreed it was safer that way. If things went wrong, she needed to be far from the blast radius. She had given him back his cut, and he had put it on slowly, feeling the weight of the patches in a way he never had before. The main room was already full when Mason walked in. Brothers lounged on couches and clustered around the bar, talking and laughing as if nothing was wrong. Because for them, nothing was. They didn't know what Mason knew. They didn't carry what Mason carried. "Wilder!" Bishop called from across the room. He was a big man, white, bald, covered in tattoos that told stories Mason had heard 100 times. "You look like hell, brother. Rough night?" "Something like that." Mason forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Press here yet?" "In the back. Said to send you in when you arrived." Mason's stomach tightened. "Just me?" "Just you." Bishop shrugged. "Don't ask me why. You know how Seamus is. Man's got more secrets than a priest." Mason nodded and made his way through the crowded room, feeling eyes on his back, feeling the weight of every patch and every promise he had ever made. The door to Seamus's office was closed. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response. Seamus Brennan was sitting behind his desk, looking exactly the way he always looked. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with a face that had been weathered by decades of hard living and harder choices. He was wearing his cut, same as always, the president's patch catching the light from the window behind him. "Mason." Seamus gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Mason sat. He kept his hands on his knees, kept his face neutral, kept everything inside locked down tight. He had spent 11 years learning to hide his emotions from this man. He could do it for a few more minutes. "I got a call this morning," Seamus said. His voice was calm, conversational, but his eyes were watching Mason with an intensity that felt like a physical pressure. From a friend at the police station. Seems someone broke into a storage facility last night, a facility where I keep certain sensitive materials. Mason said nothing. His heart was pounding, but his face betrayed nothing. Funny thing is, nothing was taken. Not that my friend could tell anyway. Just some files moved around, some locks that had been picked and relocked. Seamus leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Should I? I don't know, Mason. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Seamus studied him for a long moment. You've been with this club since you were a kid. I watched you grow up, watched you become a man, watched you earn every patch on that cut. I've trusted you with things I wouldn't trust my own son with, if I had a son. So I'm going to ask you once, and I expect an honest answer. His eyes hardened. Did my daughter come to you last night? Mason felt the ground shift beneath him. He had prepared for a lot of things, but not this. Not Seamus already knowing. Yes, he said. There was no point in lying. If Seamus already knew about the break-in, already suspected Lily, then denial would only make things worse. She came to my apartment around midnight. And what did she tell you? The moment stretched. Mason could feel the weight of the letters in his pocket, the old one from someone named D, the newer one from Seamus himself. He could feel the weight of 23 years of loyalty, 23 years of service, 23 years of believing in a man who had built an empire on his father's grave. She told me about Marcus, Mason said, about what really happened to him. Seamus didn't react. His face remained perfectly still, perfectly controlled. Only his eyes moved, a flicker of something that might have been regret or might have been calculation. I see. Seamus leaned back in his chair. And what do you want to do about it? I don't know yet. That's honest. Seamus almost smiled. I've always appreciated that about you, Mason. You don't pretend to have answers you don't have. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, older, carrying the weight of years. Did you read my letter? The one I left in the safe? Yes. Then you know my side of the story. You know why I did what I did. I know what you claim. Mason's voice was harder than he intended. I know what you wrote, but I don't know if it's true. No, you wouldn't. Seamus sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. There's no way to prove it anymore. Everyone who knew the truth is dead. Marcus, the men who helped me, the people he was planning to meet. All that's left is my word against what? The memory of a man you were too young to really know? Mason felt his jaw tighten. That man was my father. He was. And he was my brother, my best friend, the man who stood beside me when we founded this club, who bled with me, who I would have died for without a second thought. Seamus's voice cracked, just slightly. Do you think I wanted to kill him? Do you think I enjoyed it? I've lived with that night for 23 years, Mason. I've seen his face every time I close my eyes. And I've told myself every single day that it was worth it, that saving the club, saving the brothers, saving everything we built, that it justified what I did. And did it? Seamus met his eyes. I don't know anymore. Some days I think yes. Some days I think I'm just a murderer who found a convenient excuse. He spread his hands on the desk. But here's what I do know. The club survived. The brothers survived. You survived. And if I had to make that choice again, with the same information, facing the same threat, I would make it the same way. Mason absorbed this. He had expected anger, denial, justification. He had not expected this raw honesty, this willingness to let himself be judged. What do you want from me? Mason asked. I want you to make a choice." Seamus stood, walked to the window, looked out at the compound where the brothers were gathering for church. "You know the truth now. You have the power to destroy me, to expose what I did, to tear this club apart, to burn down everything I've spent my life building. If that's what you want, I won't stop you. I meant what I wrote in that letter." "I'll kneel and let you put a bullet in my head if that's what it takes to balance the scales." He turned back to face Mason. "But before you decide, I want you to ask yourself one question. What does justice look like? Is it punishing me for something I did 2 decades ago? Or is it protecting what we've built, the brothers, the families, the people who depend on this club to survive?" Mason stood. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced them to hold. "You're asking me to choose between my father's memory and the club?" "No," Seamus shook his head. "I'm asking you to choose between vengeance and purpose. Your father is gone, Mason. Nothing you do will bring him back. But this club, these brothers, they're still here. They still need leadership, protection, someone to guide them through whatever comes next." He paused. "I'm old. I won't be president forever. And when I step down, there's only one person I trust to take my place." Mason's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've earned it. The patch, the chair, everything. I've been grooming you for years, Mason, whether you knew it or not. And now that you know the truth, all of it, I'm asking you to decide what matters more, the sins of the past or the future of the club." The next 3 days were the longest of Mason's life. He didn't go to church that afternoon. He told Seamus he needed time to think, and Seamus, to his credit, didn't push. He just nodded, said he understood, and let Mason walk out of the clubhouse with the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his shoulders. He spent those 3 days riding. He took his motorcycle out onto the back roads, the empty stretches of highway where the only company was the wind and his own thoughts. He rode until his muscles ached, until his mind went quiet, until he could finally hear the voice inside him that knew what he had to do. On the 3rd night, he went to Lily. She was staying at a motel on the edge of town, hiding from her father, waiting for news. When Mason knocked on her door, she opened it immediately, and the look on her face told him she had been expecting the worst. "I made my decision," he said. Lily stepped back to let him in. The room was small, anonymous, lit by a single lamp on the nightstand. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Mason stood in front of her, feeling like a man about to step off a cliff. "I'm not going to expose him," he said. "I'm not going to tear down the club." Lily's face went pale. "Mason, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I'm not doing it because I forgive him. I don't. I might never forgive him. But I'm not doing it because destroying him would destroy everything else. The brothers who had nothing to do with what happened, the families who depend on the club, the future we could build if we do this right. So you're just going to let him get away with it? Let him keep being president? Keep pretending to be a good man?" "No," Mason's voice was firm. "I'm going to take his place." Lily stared at him. "What?" "He offered me the presidency. Said he's been grooming me for years, that I'm the only one he trusts to lead when he's gone." Mason sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "And I'm going to take it, but not on his terms, on mine." "I don't understand." Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 letters. He laid them on the bed between them. "Your father built this club on secrets and blood. He made choices that cost people their lives. My father, the men who helped him cover it up, probably others we don't even know about. I can't change that, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again." He met her eyes. "When I become president, I'm going to change things. The old ways, the violence, the silence, the secrets that destroy families, I'm going to end them. I'm going to build something new. Something that doesn't require men to kill their brothers to survive. And my father? Mason was quiet for a moment. He'll step down, retire, live out the rest of his life knowing that everything he built is being transformed into something he doesn't recognize. And he'll have to watch me do it, the son of the man he killed, wearing the president's patch, leading the club into a future he never imagined. Lily's eyes were wet. That's not justice. No, it's not. Mason took her hand. Justice would be putting him in the ground next to my father. But that's not who I want to be. I've spent my whole life learning how to be hard, how to fight, how to survive in a world that wasn't built for men who look like me. And I'm tired. I'm tired of carrying all that weight. He squeezed her hand. I want to build something better. For the club, for the brothers, for the kids who come after us, who deserve to grow up in a world where they don't have to choose between loyalty and truth. He paused. And I want to do it with you beside me. Lily was silent for a long time. The lamp flickered, casting shadows across her face, hiding her expression in pools of dark and light. You know what this means, she said finally. If you take the presidency, if you try to change things, there will be brothers who resist, old guard who want things to stay the way they've always been. They'll come for you, Mason. They'll see you as a threat. I know. And my father, even if he steps down, he won't just disappear. He'll still have allies, still have influence. He could make your life very difficult. I know that, too. And you still want to do this? Mason lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. I've spent 23 years serving a lie. I think it's time I started building a truth. The transfer of power happened 3 weeks later. It was done quietly, without fanfare. A closed church meeting where Seamus announced his retirement and nominated Mason as his successor. There were questions, of course, raised eyebrows and whispered doubts. Mason was young. Mason was black in a club that had always been predominantly white. Mason was not who most of the old guard would have chosen. But Seamus' words still carried weight, and when the vote came, it was unanimous. Mason Wilder, 30 years old, became the youngest president in the Iron Saints' history. His first act was to change the bylaws. No more secrets in the president's safe. No more deals made without the full table's knowledge. No more violence that wasn't voted on and approved by every patched member. His second act was to reach out to the Diablos. The old feud, the one that had supposedly driven his father to betrayal, had been simmering for decades. Mason proposed a truce, a sharing of routes, a division of territories, and an end to the bloodshed that had claimed too many lives on both sides. Some of the brothers balked. Some of them called him weak, called him a traitor to everything the club stood for. But when Mason stood in front of them at church and explained his reasons, when he told them, without going into details, that he had learned things about the club's history that made him want to build a different future, most of them listened. Most of them understood. The few who didn't left. They turned in their cuts, packed their bags, and rode off into whatever future waited for them. Mason let them go without rancor. Change was hard. Not everyone could handle it. Lily stood beside him through all of it. She had officially left her father's house, officially declared herself separate from the Brennan legacy. Some people whispered about it. The president's daughter shacking up with the new president, a scandal in the making. But Mason didn't care about whispers. He cared about the woman who had risked everything to tell him the truth, and who continued to risk everything by standing at his side. Seamus Brennan watched from a distance. He had kept his word, stepped down, stepped back, let Mason take the reins without interference. But Mason saw him sometimes, at the edges of gatherings, watching with eyes that held things no one could read. Regret, maybe. Pride. Resentment. All of them tangled together like the roots of an old tree. One night, 6 months after Mason became president, Seamus approached him after church. "You're doing well," the old man said. His voice was gruff, grudging, but there was something underneath it that might have been respect. "Better than I expected." "Did you expect me to fail?" "I expected you to try to tear everything down, burn it to the ground and salt the earth." Seamus shook his head. "Instead, you're building. That takes more strength than destruction." Mason studied the man who had killed his father, the man who had raised him, the man who was both the greatest betrayer he had ever known and the closest thing to a mentor he had ever had. "Why did you really groom me for this?" Mason asked. The truth this time. Seamus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired, ancient, carrying the weight of years. "Because I wanted someone to do what I couldn't, to be what I wasn't able to be." He met Mason's eyes. "I killed my best friend to save this club, and every day since then I've wondered if there was another way, a better way. Someone smarter, braver, more willing to change. They could have found it, but I wasn't that person. I was just a man with a gun and a choice I couldn't unmake." He reached out and gripped Mason's shoulder. "You're that person, son. You always were. And maybe, that's the only redemption I'm ever going to get, knowing that I put you in a position to fix what I broke." Mason looked at the hand on his shoulder. The hand that had pulled a trigger 23 years ago. The hand that had built an empire on blood and silence. And then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll fix it," he said. "Not for you, not even for my father, but for the brothers who are still alive, for the future we could still have." Seamus released his grip. His eyes were wet, but his face remained stoic. "That's all I could ask." He walked away, into the darkness, leaving Mason alone with the weight of legacy and the lightness of possibility. 2 years later, the Iron Saints were unrecognizable. The club had expanded. New chapters, new members, new alliances with organizations that would never have dealt with them before. They ran legitimate businesses now, alongside the less legitimate ones. They had established a scholarship fund for members' children, a support program for brothers who wanted to leave the life and start over. Mason had kept his promise. He had changed things. And Lily had kept hers. She stood beside him at every church meeting, every community event, every moment that mattered. They had married quietly, in a small ceremony attended only by the brothers who had been there from the beginning. She wore his cut openly now, not as a costume, but as a symbol of everything they had built together. On the 2nd anniversary of his presidency, Mason rode out to the ravine where his father had died. He had never been there before, never wanted to see the place where Marcus Wilder's life had ended. But now, with 2 years of leadership behind him and a future stretching out ahead, it felt like time. The ravine was deep, rocky, edged with scrub brush that had probably looked the same 30 years ago when Marcus' motorcycle had gone over the edge. Mason parked his bike at the guardrail and stood there, looking down into the darkness. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said quietly. "I don't know if there's anything after this, but I wanted you to know. I know what you did. I know what you were planning, and I don't know if I can forgive you for it." The wind blew. The scrub brush rustled. "But I also know that Seamus killing you didn't make anything better. It just made things different. And I've spent the last 2 years trying to prove there's a third option, something beyond betrayal and murder, beyond loyalty that requires blood." He paused. "I don't know if I've succeeded. I don't know if I ever will, but I'm trying, and I think that's all any of us can do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter, the old one, the warning that had come too late. He had carried it with him for 2 years, a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he was fighting for. He tore it in half, then in quarters, then let the pieces fall into the ravine, carried by the wind, scattered into the darkness where his father's body had once lain. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. "I hope you found whatever you were looking for, and I hope you'd be proud of what I'm trying to build." He stood there until the sun began to set. Then he climbed on his motorcycle, started the engine, and rode back toward the clubhouse. Toward Lily. Toward the brothers who were waiting for him. Toward a future that was still being written, 1 mile at a time. 3 months later, Lily told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch of the cabin they had bought together, a small place far from the clubhouse, surrounded by trees and silence. Mason had just come back from a long ride, and she had been waiting for him with a look on her face that he couldn't quite read. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Positive." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, flat for now, carrying a future that neither of them had dared to imagine. "You're going to be a father, Mason." A father. The word hit him like a blow. His own father had been a traitor, a man willing to sell out his brothers for a new start. Mason had spent his whole life trying to be different, trying to prove that the sins of the father didn't have to be passed down to the son. And now he would have a chance to prove it. A child, a legacy that had nothing to do with violence or secrets or the weight of the past. "What do you want to name them?" he asked. Lily smiled. "If it's a boy, I was thinking Marcus." Mason felt tears sting his eyes. He pulled her close, held her against his chest, and let himself feel something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. "Marcus," he repeated. "Yeah, I think he would have liked that." They sat on the porch until the stars came out, until the world fell silent around them, until the only sound was the wind through the trees and the steady rhythm of their breathing. The road behind them was long, marked by loss and betrayal and choices that couldn't be unmade. But the road ahead was longer still, and for the first time in his life, Mason Wilder was ready to ride it. "Every day, for your brothers, for your community, for yourself." He paused, looking at the faces arrayed before him, hopeful, nervous, determined. The old presidents, they believed that strength meant being willing to destroy, to burn down anything that threatened the club. But I believe something different. I believe strength means being willing to build, to create something that lasts longer than any one of us. The words settled over the room like a benediction. Some of the prospects nodded, others looked uncertain, but none of them walked away. Bishop, who had remained Mason's sergeant-at-arms through the transition, pulled him aside after the meeting. "You know some of the old guards still talk," Bishop said, his voice low. "They think you've gone soft. They think the club's lost its teeth. Let them talk." Mason clapped him on the shoulder. "Teeth are for biting. I'm more interested in building something that doesn't need to bite to survive. And if someone comes for us, if one of the other clubs decides to test your new philosophy." Mason met his eyes. "Then we defend ourselves. But we don't attack first. We don't start wars we don't have to fight." He paused. "My father died because this club couldn't find another way. Seamus killed him because he didn't believe there were other options. I'm going to prove them both wrong." Bishop studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're either the smartest man I've ever met," he said, "or the craziest. But either way, I'll follow you. That's all I ask." The baby came in early March, on a night when the last snow of the season was falling outside the hospital windows. Mason sat in the delivery room, holding Lily's hand, watching her fight through the pain with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. He had seen men face death with less courage than she showed in that room. He had seen brothers break under pressure that she absorbed without flinching. And when the doctor finally placed the baby in his arms, a boy, small and red-faced and screaming with the indignation of someone who had not asked to be born, Mason felt something inside him shift, a tectonic movement, a rearrangement of everything he had ever believed about himself and what he was capable of. "Marcus," he whispered, looking down at the tiny face. "His name is Marcus." Lily, exhausted but smiling, reached up to touch his cheek. "He has your eyes." Mason shook his head. "He has his own eyes, and his own road to ride." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "We're just here to make sure it's a good one." The brothers came to visit over the following days. They filed through the hospital room one by one, rough men in leather and denim, covered in tattoos and scars and the marks of lives lived hard. But when they held Marcus, when they cradled him in arms that had thrown punches and gripped handlebars and carried fallen brothers to their graves, something in them softened too. "He's gonna be something, Press," Hawk said, his voice thick. "You can see it already. That look in his eyes." "What look?" Hawk grinned. "The look of someone who's gonna shake up the world." Mason looked at his son, at the boy who carried the name of a grandfather he would never meet, a man whose choices had set in motion a chain of events that led to this moment, this room, this new beginning. "I hope so," he said. "I hope he shakes up everything." Seamus Brennan died 8 months later. It was peaceful, they said. He had gone to sleep in his cabin on the edge of the compound and simply not woken up. Heart attack, the doctors determined. The kind of death that came from men who had lived too hard for too long. Mason stood at the funeral, wearing his president's patch, watching them lower the casket into the ground. The winter air was sharp, cutting through his leather jacket, numbing his fingers where they hung at his sides. Around him, the brothers stood in formation, a wall of chrome and leather, paying their respects to the man who had led them for 2 decades. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't feel much of anything really, just a hollow emptiness where he had expected something more. The man in that casket had killed his father, had lied to him for 23 years, had built an empire on blood and silence and called it brotherhood. But that same man had also saved him, had pulled him off the streets when he had nothing, had given him purpose, direction, a family when his own had fallen apart, had looked at a young black kid in a world that often didn't see him, and said, "You belong here. You're one of us." How did you reconcile that? How did you mourn someone who was both your greatest enemy and your greatest mentor? Lily stood beside him, Marcus bundled in her arms against the cold. She didn't look at the grave. She looked at Mason, searching his face for some sign of what he was feeling. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "I don't know." Mason's voice was distant, carried away by the wind. "I thought I would feel something. Relief, anger, closure. But there's just nothing. He's gone, and I'm still here, and none of it feels any different than it did yesterday." "Maybe that's okay." Lily shifted Marcus in her arms, adjusting the blanket around his sleeping face. "Maybe grief doesn't always look like we expect it to. Maybe sometimes it just looks like moving forward." Mason considered this. He thought about everything Seamus had done, the murder, the cover-up, the decades of lies. He thought about everything Seamus had given him, the club, the brotherhood, the skills that had allowed him to become who he was. 2 truths existing side by side, neither one canceling out the other. "He was a monster," Mason said quietly, "and he was the closest thing to a father I ever had. And I don't know how to hold both of those things at the same time." "You don't have to figure it out today." Lily took his hand, her fingers cold against his. "You don't have to figure it out ever. Some things just are what they are." Mason looked down at Marcus, sleeping peacefully despite the cold and the sadness that hung over the gathering. The boy who would grow up never knowing his grandfather. The boy who would carry a name that meant betrayal to some and love to others. The boy who represented everything Mason was fighting to build. "Yeah," he said finally, "I guess they are." The funeral ended. The brothers dispersed, climbing onto their motorcycles, the sound of engines filling the cemetery like a final salute. And Mason rode back to the cabin he shared with Lily and Marcus, back to the life he had built from the wreckage of everything that came before. The years passed. Marcus grew from an infant to a toddler to a child with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. He asked questions constantly, about the club, about the patches, about why Daddy spent so much time with men on motorcycles. Mason answered as honestly as he could. He told Marcus about brotherhood, about loyalty, about the importance of keeping promises. He didn't tell him about the violence, the secrets, the blood that had been spilled in the club's name. That was a conversation for later, for when Marcus was old enough to understand that the world was complicated, that good men sometimes did terrible things, and that the measure of a person wasn't in their mistakes, but in how they tried to make them right. On Marcus's 5th birthday, Mason took him for his first ride. It wasn't a real ride, of course, just a short spin around the compound on a tiny motorcycle that Mason had built from scraps, barely capable of going faster than a walking pace. But Marcus whooped with joy the entire time, his small hands gripping the handlebars, his face split by a grin that reminded Mason of every good thing in the world. "Again!" Marcus shouted when Mason brought him to a stop. "Again, Daddy, again!" Mason laughed. He hadn't laughed like this in years, full and free and completely unself-conscious. He had been so focused on building, on leading, on carrying the weight of the club and the legacy and everything else that he had forgotten how to simply enjoy. But Marcus reminded him. Every day, in 100 small ways, Marcus reminded him. "One more time," Mason said. "Then it's time for dinner. 2 more times. 1, 1.5. Mason shook his head, marveling at the boy's negotiation skills. "Okay, 1.5. But then you have to wash your hands and help your mom set the table." "Deal." Mason watched his son ride the tiny motorcycle around the compound, weaving between the bigger bikes, waving at the brothers who stopped to cheer him on. He felt Lily's hand slide into his, felt her presence beside him like an anchor, like a home. "He's going to be a handful," she said. "He already is. Are you ready for it?" Mason thought about the question, really thought about it. He thought about his father, who had chosen betrayal. He thought about Seamus, who had chosen murder. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, standing in the sun, watching his son discover the joy of the road. "I don't know if anyone's ever ready," he said, "but I'm going to be there, every day, for whatever comes." Lily squeezed his hand. That's all any of us can do. That night, after Marcus had been put to bed and the cabin had grown quiet, Mason sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey and the weight of everything he had built pressing gently against his shoulders. The compound stretched out before him, lit by the glow of the clubhouse in the distance, dotted with the shadows of motorcycles that belonged to men and women who had chosen to follow him. Lily joined him, carrying her own glass, settling into the chair beside his with the comfortable ease of long partnership. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything." Mason took a sip of his whiskey. "Nothing. The way those two things are sometimes the same." "That's very philosophical for a biker." He smiled. "I'm a man of many talents." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, distant engines, the occasional burst of laughter from the clubhouse. It was peaceful. The kind of peace Mason had never expected to find, never dared to hope for. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked finally. "Not exposing him, not burning it all down." Mason considered the question. He had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times over the years. Every time he looked at his father's grave. every time he remembered the letters, every time the weight of the truth pressed down on him and made him wonder if he had made the right choice. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. Not because what your father did was forgivable, it wasn't. And not because I think I made the noble choice, I didn't. I made the practical choice. The choice that let me build something instead of just tearing something down. And that's enough?" "It has to be." He turned to look at her, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. "We don't get to go back and make different choices. We only get to live with the ones we made and try to make the future better than the past." Lily reached over and took his hand. Her skin was warm against his, familiar after all these years. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I say that enough." "You don't have to say it. I know. I want to say it anyway." She squeezed his fingers. "I love you, Mason Wilder, for everything you are, for everything you're trying to be, for the man you've become despite everything that tried to break you." Mason felt his throat tighten. He had spent so much of his life being strong, being steady, being the rock that everyone else leaned on. But in this moment, with this woman, he let himself be something else, something softer, something true. "I love you too," he said, "more than I know how to say." They sat together until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold. Then they went inside, checked on their sleeping son, and climbed into bed together. And in the darkness, in the quiet, Mason Wilder finally let himself rest. 10 years later, on the anniversary of Seamus Brennan's death, Mason rode out to the ravine where his father had died one final time. Marcus was 15 now, tall, strong, with his father's build and his mother's fire. He had asked to come along, and Mason had said yes. It was time. Time for his son to know the full truth. Time for the last secrets to be laid bare. They parked their motorcycles at the guardrail. Mason's a weathered Harley that had carried him through 2 decades of brotherhood. Marcus's a smaller bike that he had earned through years of learning and patience. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the ravine stretched out before them like a wound in the earth. "This is where your grandfather died," Mason said. "The one I named you after." Marcus nodded. He had known this much already, that his grandfather had died in a motorcycle accident, that Mason had been too young to remember him clearly, that the name he carried was a tribute to a man who existed now only in photographs and stories. "There's more," Mason said. "Things I never told you, things I wasn't sure you were ready to hear." "I'm ready now." Mason looked at his son, at the young man he had become, at the road that stretched out before him, full of choices he would have to make for himself. And then he told him everything. About the letters, about Seamus, about the murder and the cover-up and the truth that had been hidden for decades. About the choice Mason had made, to build instead of destroy, to lead instead of avenge, to carry the weight of his father's memory without letting it crush him. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. The sun had set, and the stars were beginning to emerge, one by one, like candles being lit in a distant church. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Marcus asked finally. "Because I wanted you to know the club before you knew its sins. I wanted you to see what we could be, not just what we had been." Mason turned to face him. "And because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the truth, you would hate me for not doing more, for not burning it all down when I had the chance." "Do you wish you had? Burned it down?" Mason thought about the question. He thought about his father, lying at the bottom of this ravine. He thought about Seamus, lying in a grave that Marcus had never visited. He thought about all the brothers who had followed him, trusted him, believed in the future he was trying to build. "No," he said, "I don't wish that. I wish none of it had happened. I wish my father had been a better man, and Seamus hadn't been a murderer. And the world was simple enough that good and evil were easy to tell apart. He paused. But it's not. And wishing doesn't change anything. All we can do is take what we're given and try to make something worthwhile out of it. Marcus absorbed this. Then, slowly, he nodded. I want to ride with the club, he said, when I'm old enough. I want to carry on what you've built. Mason felt his heart swell with pride and fear and love all tangled together. It's a hard road, harder than you know. I know, but it's our road. It's who we are. Marcus met his father's eyes. And I want to be part of it. Mason reached out and gripped his son's shoulder. He felt the strength there, the determination, the echo of every generation that had come before. Then you will be, he said, when you're ready, on your own terms. They stood together at the ravine, father and son, looking out at the darkness where a man had died and a legacy had begun. The wind blew cold across the Oklahoma plains, carrying the smell of dust and distance and the promise of roads not yet traveled. And then, without another word, they climbed on their motorcycles and rode home. Together. The road went on. The brotherhood endured. And Mason Wilder, president of the Iron Saints, finally understood what it meant to be free.